So today we're going to focus on creating a training file of how to program an MX790 remote that has an MRF260 base in it. First off, let's go ahead and create a new file. File new, save the changes from the previous file. I'm going to go ahead and select the MX790 remote so that the MX790 remote is up here and hit OK. So when you do that, you'll notice it comes up with a completely blank system. Essentially, the room is blank. It has an MX790 remote in it. And the page down here is essentially blank with the devices associated with it. So one of the first things we're going to do is go ahead and add an MRF260 base to it. The MRF260 base is the unit that is used to communicate from the remote back to devices located in the closet. So I'm going to hit add, and it's going to ask me what the name is. I'm going to call this Theater MRF260. There's an access ID here. This is completely new, so I'm going to have to work on that part. MRF260 is located here, and we've added it to the theater. Oh, that was MRZ. I added the wrong thing. So we're going to remove that. That's why that looked weird. I'm going to go to MRF260 and add it. Again, the room name is Theater MRF260. And the ID is something other than testing. For most purposes, I do A just to make it easy. Now, we're going to assign ports to this device as well. So the ports are the port on the back of the MRF260 that is connected to the IR head that goes to each device. In our situation, we're going to have a TV located out in the main area. We're also going to have a blue disc player and a cable box. Now, the reason I'm combining these is for a specific reason on port 1 and port 2 there. I did that specifically, but before we do that, we're going to finish the parts. We also have a receiver and a Roku device. Now, why did I put TV on port 1 and this blue disc cable box on port 2? Port 1 and port 2 on an MRF260 have the ability to adjust the signal strength. So when the TV is located somewhere further away from the base, like let's say through a cat, like 40 feet away, 30 feet away, and you have a Cat 6 or Cat 5 that's communicating between the MRF260 as an extension cable all the way over to the TV, then sometimes you need to boost the power. So we utilize the power boost on that. And then also with the port 2, where we're splitting between blue disc and cable box, we're going to make sure that since we're splitting the signal, that we have enough signal so we can increase the signal there if we need to on those two. So that's why we chose those two ports. I hit OK. Now I have an MRF260 and an MX790 in there, and I hit the close here. So the first steps we're going to do is go ahead and create name and name devices. Okay. So we're going to start up here, and like we talked about, we have a few devices in the system. The first one's going to be a cable box. So I'm going to say watch cable here. The next device is going to be watch blue disc or Blu-ray. The last one is watch Roku. Now the other thing that we always do whenever we are working on the remote is we have an all off option. That all off is literally just as it states, it turns everything off. Now I'm going to hit the save function here. Now you have watch cable, watch Blu-ray, watch Roku, and all off. Generally speaking, we don't utilize symbols that are located over here. We can do so, but for a lot of people, I think it's cleaner and clearer that we just have it this way. Now, if you really have somebody who's interested in doing that, or you want to do that, you can come down here and say, well, I'm going to look at devices, and I'm going to have a Blu-ray player. So here's a Blu-ray. I'm going to drop this Blu-ray here. It's going to ask me, do you want to do the entire device or replace only with the image? I'm going to say image only. Now, when I did that, you can tell here on the button, it says Blu-ray disc behind it with a symbol, but yet it has watch BD over top of it. I'll show you later here in the programming how to make sure that the text, this watch BD, is gone when the user would see it. So we'll walk through that process here in a little bit. Now I'm going to hit save. So this page is saved. But notice we have a cable box, a Blu-ray player, and a Roku, but we don't have the TV and the receiver. Generally speaking, we don't put the TV and receiver on this page because we don't want to confuse the user. They just care about watching something. But when we're doing a TV, we'll come in here and we'll add the TV. And then we'll add the receiver. All right, and hit save. So the TV and receiver are now in the system. All right, so our next steps then that are associated with is creating the IR data with each one of those devices. So if I hit the IR data, the first thing that comes up is watch cable. So then I go to IR data from, hit cable box, and then come in here, and since this is Cox, I'm going to come down here, hit the C button, and it brings me down a little bit further, and here's the Cox digital cable. For us, in most cases, the Contour 2 is the cable box that's being utilized, so I'll hit that, and then hit Save All. All right. If I wanted to validate that this is the correct cable box or the correct IR codes, I could come over here and hit something like Channel Plus, and then hit Test. And as long as I have the remote plugged into the actual computer here through the USB port, the test signal we've sent out through the remote and sent via IR from the end of the remote. And so if the cable box is in view of the remote and it changes channel, then you'll be like, oh, yep, we have the right codes. If it doesn't change channel, maybe you do have the wrong codes and we have to find a different code set. All right. So again, I hit Save All. So all the cable box IR commands are now saved under cable box, and I'll go to Watch BD. Now in this case, I'm going to assume, so here's our Blu-ray DVD options. I'm going to assume this is a Sony Blu-ray. Now, what we can do is if we have the exact code associated with the Blu-ray disc, we might say, hey, it's a Blu-ray BDP S670, and hit that. Now, notice here that the BDP S670, the power is not power on, power off, it's just power. So some cable boxes, or excuse me, some Blu-ray players, even though they don't show up here, may still have a unique power on, power off function. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll go all the way down to the bottom where there's generic codes and see if I can find a generic code set that works for power on and power off. Now again, to test this, what I might do is I might hit this power on button and hit the test button. And through the remote, as long as the remote and the Blu-ray player are seeable from each other, I'll hit that, and then let's say the remote sends a signal out and the Blu-ray player turns on. I might wait another 10 seconds and hit the test again. Now the reason I'm doing that is because sometimes, and I've had this happen, where this power on function actually is not a discrete power on for that Blu-ray player. It happens to be just a power toggle. So if I wait 10 seconds and send it again, and if the Blu-ray player stays on, then you know it was discrete on. If the Blu-ray player turns off after hitting that button again, then you'll know, oh, that was just a power toggle button, not a power on only. So then similarly, when those are the situations, I'll also test it again. I'll say power off, test, and then turn the Blu-ray player off, and then wait about 10 seconds and then hit power off again. And if the Blu-ray player stays off, then you know that you actually have the right codes for everything. So in this case, I'm going to hit Sony 28, save all, and all the Blu-ray codes for that Sony are going to the Blu-ray option there. On the Roku, we'll go to streaming media player here, and then find the Roku. And for us, generally speaking, we use the Roku Ultra, which again has a whole bunch of codes over here. We could test them if we needed to. In this case, we're just going to say save all. Then we're going to go to all off. Now all off, we don't have to assign it to anything because there is no codes or any machine associated with this, no device, no electronic device associated with it. Go to TV. Let's go ahead and go to television here. And let's assume we have a Samsung TV. And again, you can come in here and you can find your unique number, or in this case, you also have discrete functions here. So you have discrete functions 1, 2, and 3. If you see everything you need, go ahead. Usually I use 3 because it has the proper number of HDMI cables, 1, 2, 3. Sometimes you'll need a 4th one. If that's the case, you might have to go to a different function. And some of those things again are down here towards the bottom where you have generic Samsung But then sometimes some of these only have power on, power off. So here's power on, power off for Samsung, and HDMI 1, 2, 3, and HDMI 4 here. So again, you have some options there. It's easy on the Samsung TVs just to use like discrete functions up here. So we're going to hit Save All. And then, excuse me, for the receiver, we're going to go with AVR and amplifiers. That's AVR is the audio video recorder, or audio video receiver, excuse me. And we're going to use the Denon. And again, you could come down here and actually, find the actual function. Like, so often we'll use an S like 760 or 750 or something like that. Now, usually they don't necessarily have the latest model, but they might have the previous year's model, like the 750 to the 760. In this case, they also have multiple zones. Sometimes it's zone 1, zone 2, Blu-ray, or Bluetooth, tuner and such. Generally speaking, we use zone 1 constantly. And that is done because we don't want to confuse other people with options about zone 2 or even the tuner and such. If we're going to use the music zones, we'll use something like a Sonos or a Hios. So, AVR 750H, zone 1, power on, power off, all the different inputs and such. So we'll hit Save All. Okay? So, at this point in time now, we have assigned IR data to each one of these devices. And remember, we're underneath the Program tab, Create Names and Devices, and here's the IR data. Now, edit buttons. So, what you can do is for each remote, there's a top part of the remote, right? That's the custom pages. Like, you know, you have the 6 different lit up options up on top for buttons. You can change the way that looks for each one, or even change the name of things. So usually, like with the page up and page down on a cable remote, I like the page up and the page down to be on top of each other like this, so that the push button on the side is easily done with the thumb of page up and page down. So I like doing that. Also, this cable box remote, even though it was Contour Digital, says Xfinity. What's up with that? Well, Xfinity actually is the manufacturer of the box, but it doesn't make sense to a Cox cable user to have Xfinity on their thing. It is the same thing as Menu or Contour. I can't spell. See here. Contour. I think it's how Menu Contour. So I'll actually just update that name so that they know what that looks like. When I'm done with that, I'll hit Save. Now, does the user actually see these hide buttons here? You can actually hide the page as well. Does the user need to know about all power or TV power? No, we're taking care of all that, so I'll just go ahead and hide that page and hit Save again. So then we'll go down to watch Blu-ray. Now, on the Blu-ray side of things, again, look how many functions are here, and this can be kind of confusing to a end user. We don't necessarily need all that. What I might do is I want to say, hey, I want home, eject, pop-up menu, I like that. Oh, they're an older couple, they really like the subtitles, we'll leave that here. They really don't need favorites, I'm going to push that over here. The options thing, okay, that's something good you can always have there. And then you can clean this up. And then again, I might say I'm going to hide the other pages just so it doesn't get confusing to them of what's going on. And then hit Save. Watch Roku. Again, similarly, they might be like, well, we have a few things that we use all the time. Amazon Prime Video is one of those things. HBO Now is another thing. I don't know what might be another one that they want to use. Disney Plus. And then what else do we want to have up here? Well, we don't need a mic because our system doesn't even have a mic. I grabbed the wrong thing there. But we do want to use the replay. The replay is that instant back 10 or 15 seconds. So we want to use that. And we want to have a back button. But I don't see a home button. Well, I bet the home button is going to be on the remote, but our remote actually doesn't have the word home on it. So I'm going to type in home here. Now, we're going to come back to this in a little bit about this home button because it doesn't actually even have any IR codes associated with it right now. But we'll come back to that. So here's the page I want them to see. And again, you might even be like, well, they said they like Spotify and Pandora, and Netflix is there and Hulu, but we don't need Crackle. Well, I'm going to leave the first 2 pages shown and then hide the last 3. Okay, hit Save. All off, we don't have to do anything because you don't need to do anything on all off. TV, one of the things I sometimes do is I reorganize the HDMI cable, the HDMIs a little bit for inputs because it makes it easier on trying to find them later on when we're programming. Beyond that, that's about it. So I hit Save. And then receiver, similarly, I might do a couple things. There's surround sound modes like movie and music. I like to leave those up there. There might be a couple other ones like multi-channel stereo is a standard one that gets utilized sometimes. Also, setup is a good thing, so that you can utilize that for when you're trying to set up the system if you need to when you're programming it. But also some other things that you might do if you want to is to reorganize the inputs. So I know we're going to use cable sat. I know we're going to use Blu-ray. I know we're going to use media player. Let's see if I can, oh, media player is already up there. And so there's the cable sat, there's the Blu-ray, and there's the media player. So I'll put those closer to the top so that way it's easily seen. And again, I might even hide some of these here just because that makes life a little easier. I don't have to actually hide the end user probably won't even see this area, so I'm not going to necessarily hide anything else, but just to make it cleaner and easier for me to look at and utilize. Okay, so I'll hit the save on that function as well. And now I have given IR codes and edited the codes to all the different devices that are applicable. Okay, so then the next thing we're going to do is called punch through. Now this is a little bit different concept. On the remote themselves, it has the ability to take a button, let's say it's on the first page, and apply that button through every button push on every page that we use. An easy way to look at this is to say for volume. No matter what's being done on the remote, if I'm watching cable box, if I'm watching a Blu-ray player, if I'm watching the Roku player, if I ever hit the button of volume up or volume down, I want that code to automatically go to the receiver. So what I do is I touch the top here, make sure main's highlighted, hit the bottom here after hitting shift to highlight all of them. So main, shift, touch down here, all of them are highlighted. And then I come over here to the volume and I say, hey, no matter what, on every one of these pages here, I want the receiver to be the primary unit it's sent to when you hit the volume button, this volume or mute. Easy and straightforward. One of the other things we also do is the power function. And I want that to always come from the main. And again, we'll talk through this here a little bit further, but this is just information to know at this point. So after I've done all that, I hit save. Okay, so all that's saved. Then I go to RF. And then the RF is trying to tell the devices, okay, whenever I send a code from watch cable or from watch Blu-ray, I want it to go out a different ways. For us, whenever we're doing things, generally speaking, it's always IR and RF. Now, as I'm doing this, you'll see unknown, unknown, unknown. We'll address that here in just a second. But what this is telling the system is, hey, whenever I send a code out for watch cable, I want it to come out of the IR emitter on the remote, and I want it to be sent to the RF base station, the MRF 260 that we added. So then where is that MRF 260 that we added? Oh, it's right there. So I just pick those. So that way we know it's going to that unit, and then it automatically takes care of the ports. Excuse me, it does not automatically take care of the port. It automatically assigns it to all ports. Now, for cable, if you remember right, we had a cable box port. For Blu-ray, we also had said that was coming out of the same box, port 2. Then for the Roku, it has its own port. Excuse me, I missed that one. For the all-off, we really don't care. For the TV, it has the port 1. For the receiver was port 3. And then again, for the main 2 right now, we really don't care. And the main, we don't care. Now, when it says all ports, there's an option also of blaster. So the MRF 260 has a blaster, an IR blaster on the front of it. So sometimes, once in a while, that is also a usable function. It just is very specific on when you want to use that. All right, so we now assigned it to all of these. You can leave it to all ports. It's just that every once in a while, if you leave it on all ports, what happens is when I hit the cable button, it'll actually send the cable box IR code to also the receiver, the Roku, and all of those things. Now, theoretically, that's not much different than taking a remote and just pointing it at all the devices in the rack and hitting the remote, and it says, oh, I received IR, the receiver received the IR codes from the remote, but I don't care about those because they're not for me. And that generally is not a big deal. Now, the only thing that has happened to me once before, or a couple times before, is that when you send those codes like that, the receiver for that device can somewhat get confused, and then when you send the code for that device shortly after that, it'll be like, oh, I'm sorry, I was confused with the previous code and I did not receive the code you just sent. So that's one of the reasons we get individualized like this. Okay, so again, save, theme, we don't really ever change anything here, hit save, and then if we were ready, we were going to download that. Now I'm going to call this training 2 for my file. Okay, and then if we have the USB connected to the remote, we just hit download and then we'd be able to download this here. Now we aren't quite ready for that to happen because right now all we have is just kind of I'd say a dumb universal remote, meaning that it can control each one of those devices, but it doesn't have anything special to it with the macros. So the first thing we're going to do then is work on creating the macros so that way the end user doesn't have to do any work themselves. So we'll come here to hit watch cable. Now there's a couple ways of doing the macro generation. One of those ways is right now you could start creating the macro by hitting this watch cable, hit record, and then we can start doing things such as we know that when we're watching cable, we're going to first turn on the TV, turn on the receiver, turn on the cable box. And then we probably want to wait just a little bit when those turn on, give them just a few seconds to turn on all the way, and then send other signals to those devices. Like for the TV, we want to say, hey, you're going to be on HDMI 1. For the cable box, we don't have to really do anything else, but for the receiver, then we'd come back and say, hey, you're going to be on the cable SAT input. So we could do that right here if we wanted to by going, like I said, touch watch cable, hit the record button, and notice that when you hit the record button, this starts blinking over here, so it knows I'm in recording mode. And the first thing I was going to do, as I said, is I'm going to go turn the receiver on because that takes the longest to boot up. So I go receiver, page 1, and hit the power button. And notice over here, it says now alias receiver power on. So that is one of the first steps in the macro. Then I could go back over here to the TV and hit TV and then hit power on. And it does it here. Now, if I come back here to the cable box and hit here, it does do watch cable here. Now, when I said there's 2 different ways of doing this, we could keep going this process and keep right on going. I'm going to stop and hit record. But what I have found is that every once in a while, this process doesn't work the best, meaning that like I'll double click on something and it won't even add it to the macro. My best use and also the most efficient time is going to view and then go to functions. Now recognize when I hit simulate here, here's watch cable, watch Blu-ray, watch Roku all off. When I go to functions, it's the exact same thing as far as the remote, but here's that page 1 on the top, watch cable, watch Blu-ray, watch. So these are the buttons on the top, and then here's the rest of the buttons on the remote. Up, down, left, right, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever. So here again, if I go to watch cable, I've already started that macro. Well, I'd like to keep going with that macro generation. I'm going to adjust the size of this image here. And then what I'm going to do is, part of this macro for watch cable includes the TV. So I'm going to double click here and now the TV comes up. I'm going to just shrink this down just a little bit so we can fit multiple things on here. And then the receiver is here. So again, shrink this down just a little bit so I can fit it. So really for the initial generation of the system on the watch cable, if I hit record, so now we went to power on, all those things, hit record. Well, okay, we've turned the TV on, we turned the receiver on, and we turned the cable box on. I'm going to put a delay in there now of, let's say, 5 seconds. Notice the delay gets added here. And now I'm going to go back into the TV and I'm going to say, hey, TV, HDMI 1 is my input. So that shows up over here in the corner. And then on the receiver, I'm going to say that's cable SAT input. Okay. So now I've finished recording this macro. I say finished, that's not entirely true. So there's something else that's happening here. One of the things it's doing is there's this thing called page jumps. Right now, the default put the page jump at the very top. So if I hit that button, it would jump right to watch cable. And then it would do the rest of these functions here. Now, these functions take time. So this thing's going to probably take, with this 5 seconds here, it's going to take almost 7 or 8 seconds for it to walk through all these things. And the user is just going to be sitting there going, well, it says I can hit this watch cable right now. I can control my cable box, but nothing's happening. What's going on? Well, it's doing all these functions here. So what we want to do is change that up a little bit. We aren't going to jump to the watch cable until the very last. And when we hit the button at the very beginning, we're going to do what's called a please wait screen. So I hit the please wait, hit please wait here, hit OK, and notice that please wait jumps in here. So right now when they hit the watch cable button, it's going to say please wait on the remote, and then in the background it's going to do things like send the TV power, send the receiver power, send the cable box power, wait 5 seconds, send HDMI 1 to the TV, send cable SAT to the receiver. Now jump to the cable box remote, and then now they can start controlling the cable box. So overall, pretty straightforward there. One of the things you're going to have to do for testing is validating that the TV and the receiver are fully on before it sends the other additional signals. So like this 5 second delay here may need to actually be more. It could be up to maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 seconds long. Because what happens is when a device turns on and it's going through its startup function, it cannot receive additional IR signals like inputs. So what you have to do is wait and be patient. And so then sometimes you have to change that delay. So sometimes what I'll do right now is I'd go back to program, download and test. It's going to say, do you want to save it? I'll say yes. And then it's going to be like, oh, let's just download this and try it out. Okay. So sometimes I'll download this to remote and try it out. The other thing you can do sometimes is just do a test function here where you hit the test. And again, if your remote is plugged in and your remote can see the equipment's in the closet and the TV, you could use this test function and not even download it all the way to the remote and just hit the test function and it'll actually walk through the test on the remote. All right, so those are some options there. Now, imagine if I'm an end user and I'm watching TV. I've turned the TV on, everything turned on the way it's supposed to, and then I'm like, oh, I want to hop over to Roku because on the Roku device, let's just say, for example, I had a YouTube TV running and I'm watching a completely different game. And I just want to hop over and look at that game and then hop back. Well, if I wanted to do that, let's say I watch, we haven't programmed it yet, but let's say I hit the watch Roku button and I jump over to watch Roku and then I'm like, oh, I'm going to switch back over to watch cable. Well, right now, if they hit the watch cable button, it's still going to take 6 or 7 seconds for that to all happen because of this 5 second delay. But yet the TV's already on, the receiver's already on, so do we really need that 5 second delay? And the answer, of course, is no, we don't. So one of the functions of the MX790 remote is it has kind of an if-then type logic available to it. The if-then logic, though, it needs to be programmed into it. So down here in this lower hand corner, there's a thing called variable. When you hit the variable, you'll notice that true, false pop up down here. So again, this is kind of like, if this is true, do this. If it's false, do this. Well, if what is true or if what is false, what are we doing? Well, what we're doing is have to be based on a variable. Now that variable doesn't exist yet in this program. So I hit the variable and hit new variable and it's going to ask me to create it. I always just call this TV on variable. And what I'm saying is, and then notice that even though I just created that variable, it's still not showing up. So I have to go ahead and select it. So what I'm saying is, if the variable TV is on when this button is hit, when this watch cable button, if the TV variable is on, it'll do these steps. Right now, blank. If the watch variable TV is false, then it'll do these steps. Okay? So, TV on? No. Which means false. Do these steps. TV on? Yes. True. Do these steps. So, what we're going to do is copy and paste these steps. Again, I just touch the top, hit the shift button, hit it, and then copy. And then I'll come in here and then paste. So now I have the exact same setup, except that what I want to do here is when the TV is on, I don't want as long of a delay. I'm going to hit a half-second delay. I do still do a small delay because then you do give the TV or the receiver or those things just a little bit more time to say, hey, I sent you a signal, and then, oh, I'm going to send you another signal here in a minute. Now, you may also ask, well, why do I even need to send the power on for the TV and the receiver and the cable box? My experience has been that every once in a while, things just don't go as expected. So they hit the watch cable, everything turned on except for the receiver. And they're like, what? Oh, okay, I'll hit the main button, hit watch cable again. It'll go through the process faster, right? But it still will turn the receiver on just in case it didn't get turned on the first time. So it's, in my experience, has always been, it's good practice to go ahead and do it that way. All right, so, well, I've done this programming based on a variable TV on and off, But where does it even know what where the variable is? Is it on or off? How do I even know that? Well, let's go back to the false statement here. Is the variable on right now? Well, I don't know. It doesn't tell me anything. Well, then I have to assign it that variable. So I go in here. I'm going to go at the very end. I'm going to select down here, hit variable, and here's my TV on variable. Is it on? Well, yeah, it must be on because I just turned it on. I put the TV power on. So now I'm going to say the variable TV on is true. At the end of this macro, it's definitely on. I'll do the same thing even over here on the true, because even though I just changed the time frame, I still want the TV to be set in the variable to be on. Now recognize that all we're doing is telling the remote where it's at. The remote doesn't actually know the TV's on. It's just that we're telling it it's on. Okay. So then what will happen is, well then, okay, if that's on now, well, how does it get turned off? Well, that jumps us back over to something else. Now, before I make any more changes, I'm going to go ahead and file, save. So everything's saved. And then I'm going to jump over to all off. My all off macro is turning everything off, which would also indicate controlling that variable. Okay, so my macro looks something like this. I'm going to hit record, and I'm going to turn the TV off by hitting that one, and I'm going to turn the receiver off. And like we talked about the cable box, I could possibly turn other things off like the cable box and the Blu-ray player, but there's a couple of default things there that happen we'll talk about here in just a minute. And then finally, I'm going to go ahead and say, hey, I just turned everything off, so my TV is now off, which is false. So when I hit the all off button and I turn the devices off, then I tell it that variable's off. So that way it knows the next time we hit the button after the variable's off, I'll go to the false statement on the watch cable because the variable is off. All right. Now again, we're going to do something similar we did before, where we have this jump. I'm going to drag this jump down here, and we're going to change this jump. Beforehand, it was going to jump to a thing called all off, but that all off doesn't do anything. We actually want to jump back to the main page when we're done with turning everything off. And then before we turn everything off, we're going to jump to the please wait screen. So again, the macro for all off is please wait, turn the TV off, turn the receiver off, change the variable itself, and then jump back to the main page. Pretty straightforward. And I'm going to hit file, save. Note that the all off function does not utilize the variable. It doesn't need to because there's no delays, there's nothing going on there. Okay? So if we have a good working watch cable, the next steps for watch Blu-ray and watch Roku are about the same, just a couple minor things. So what I will do is I will copy the function. So again, to copy, I hit the top, hit the shift key, hit the bottom, and then right click copy. And I'll go watch Blu-ray, and I'll just go ahead and copy or just paste. So again, right now it says jump to please wait, turn the TV on, turn this on. Well, we don't need the cable box to turn on, so I can delete that. But we do want the Blu-ray player to turn on. Well, I don't have the Blu-ray player up here, so I come over here and I go, well, let's watch add the Blu-ray player. It comes up here. I just change the size of it a little bit again. Okay, so go back up here to watch BD. Well, I'm not, again, I got to insert this, so I'm going to hit record and then turn the Blu-ray player on. So now over here, what you see is receiver on, TV on, and Blu-ray player on. Wait 5 seconds, or half a second. Oh, we don't want that yet. We actually want it to be closer to 5 seconds. Okay? And then TV goes to the same HDMI, but oh, the receiver is the wrong one. So I'm going to touch the receiver here. I could just delete it right now, or I could go record. Receiver, I'm going to go to BD for the input, and then hit record off. And notice that it stuck that receiver record there. Now I don't want the cable SAT in there for the input, so I hit delete. And also, I don't want to jump to the cable box page. No, I want to jump, so I'm going to delete that. I'm going to jump to the Blu-ray display, which is right here. Okay, so again, now I have a successful Blu-ray startup function, but it's also takes 5 seconds in between. I'm going to change that. I'm going to go to variable, TV on, and note the variable is here already, but so now I'm just going to copy and paste this function. over to the true statement, and then just change the time. So there we go. That was easy. The watch blue disk is now ready, right? And then, of course, the watch Roku is about the same. So I'll come in here, I'll paste that function. Please wait, power on, power on. Well, we don't need the Blu-ray player on, but we do probably need to wake up the Roku device. Okay, how do we do that? So I'm going to come back over here to the watch Roku function. I'll highlight that. I'll double click page 1, and now Roku comes up. And for the Roku, the way to wake that up is probably hit the home button. So again, instead of power on here, we'll hit record. We'll hit the home button here. And then we still have to address something on this home button. So we're going to get to that here in just a little bit. So don't lose focus of that. But we're going to get rid of the Blu-ray player on. And then again, instead of jumping to the Blu-ray player here, we're going to jump to the Roku page. Okay? So now that we have a Roku fully functional thing, go here, copy that. Oh, we didn't do anything here. Oh, variable, TV on, true, paste. And then we'll change this to 0.5 seconds instead of 5 seconds. All right? So now, oh, the receiver's wrong too. Darn it, I missed that. So, hit the record button for receiver. Now we're going to go to media player on the receiver. Right? So we got to get rid of this BD for the Roku. Also, I'm just going to do a quick copy, bring it over here, hit here, paste that in. Now I have a media player instead of the Blu-ray player. Delete that. So there, now we have a fully functioning file, save. So now my remote is essentially programmed for macros, and the all-off is even function. But there's a few things we're still missing. And this is where the details count. I'm going to go back to View, go back to Simulate, and so I'm back here at the front page, right there. Now, we talked about the Roku player. I'm going to go down here to the Roku and double-click on the page 1. Okay? Page 1 brings up here. Note how when I hit the Amazon button here, it has this little P, and I go over here to the right where the macro that says, hey, I'm sending this IR code, streaming media player 992 Amazon. So every time I hit something here, it sends out an IR code. But note on the home button, which was something that we typed in on the edit buttons function under program. Remember, we went to program, edit buttons, watch Roku, home. We typed that in manually. We created a blank space and just added it. So it didn't have any IR codes associated with it. So if I hit the home button right now, nothing's going to happen. What do we want to do here? Well, what we want to do is then do a home button and assign it a code. Now, if I look up here at the guide button, the guide is kind of hard. I hit it. It says home down here. So the guide button is the home button. But again, since our remote doesn't have the ability to say home on it, the end user wouldn't know that that's what we want to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit home. We can hit record and hit guide, and see how it now functions is going there. So whenever I hit the home button, it's just like I hit the guide button, which is the home function. All right, so all I did was assign it essentially to that. Similarly, the back button at least has something here, which is part of the Roku device. Okay, so now this home button has a function, and then when I use that home function in the macro, it knows to go and use the guide button and send the back or the home command to the Roku. All right? So that was one of those steps. Also in this function here, if you remember right, we had a situation where we have this Blu-ray disc image, and then we have this text sitting over top of it. Well, ideally we wouldn't have this text because that just confuses it. So if I touch this button, hit right click, I can do is hidden text. Okay, so if I did, it has a check mark here now. That means that when this gets sent to the remote, the text won't show up, just the image will show up. And again, maybe that's exactly what we wanted to do. All right. Now, some of the other stuff we have to finalize here, excuse me, is the power functions. We talked about the fact that we want these power buttons here to be utilized across all the different remotes, but what do we want them to do? Well, for the green power on, I'd like it to be the exact same function as the watch cable. Now, I'm going to try something here. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I'm going to hit record and hit watch cable. Notice how that didn't work. It didn't show up over here. Then we have to go back to view, functions, power on, record the macro, and hit watch cable. And now it shows up. I don't know why, but as I was telling you beforehand, when you're in the other view of the simulate view, it just doesn't always work the way you want it to, so I don't like that. So we just did that for the power on. Now we're going to do it for the power off. Power off is the same as hitting the all off button. Okay? So no matter what page I'm on, if I hit the power on or power off button at the top, here or here, no matter what page I'm on, I don't care if I'm on blue disk, I hit the power on, it says PT, see it's punched through. It's power off, that's the same. Power on here is like watch cable, power off is here is like all off. Okay? So that's what we just did with that. Now we're at that stage of downloading the system. So if I go program, download, by the way, I better hit file, save. So I don't want to lose anything there. If I hit that download button, it's going to be like, oh, yep, you're programmed into the USB, hit the download. So the next step is just troubleshooting and testing out things. So some of the things you have to test out, one of the main things you have to test out is that the delays that we set up in the watch cable or the watch blue disk of 5 seconds, we have to determine if that's adequate. So it's a fine line to walk. You don't want to go too high and create too much time, because then it gets frustrating to the user. They're like, it just takes forever for everything to work, but it seems like everything's up on the system, right? It should work. So it takes too long. But also, you don't want to go so short that you accidentally don't get the inputs in. So the way to test this is simple. You turn on the TV with the watch cable process, right? Everything turns on, seems like everything's working. Then hit watch BD. So now you turn on the Blu-ray disc player. And so now what's up on the TV is the Blu-ray disc main menu and such. So then what you're going to do is you're going to hit the power off. After you hit the power off, what should have happened obviously is the receiver should have turned off, the TV should have turned off, and maybe even the Blu-ray player may have turned off, depending on how things are set up. Then wait about 30 seconds and then go back and hit the watch cable. Now when you turned everything off, the inputs were to the Blu-ray player. But now if I hit watch cable, what should happen is the TV should turn on, the Blu-ray player should turn on, or excuse me, all the cable, the receiver should turn on, and then eventually the receiver switch over to the right input. So if that worked right, it'll be on the right input. If it's still showing the cable box, what that means is that the delay was not adequate and you need to increase the delay a couple seconds. Now, one way to also test the TV on this is to manually take the TV remote, and so before you turn it off, switch the HDMI over to HDMI 2 or HDMI 3. Turn everything off, wait 30 seconds, turn it back on, and then see if the TV turns on back to the right default of HDMI 1. If the TV doesn't turn on at the right default, you might also have to increase the delay just a little bit. It's like to 6 or 7 or 8 seconds. So those are some basic steps to watch there. Okay. The best thing to do here is to also test on-offs, changing inputs, turn off, turn back on to a different input, and so forth, all across the board. The other things that you might run into are things like double clicks. What I mean by double clicks is, if I'm watching Roku, if I hit the watch Roku and I end up in the Roku function box, and I'm going up and down, sometimes what will happen is you'll hit the up button once, but it'll jump twice on the screen. That's driven by what's called repeats. Okay, so the easiest way to do that is, see, I can touch if I hit the up button here, it brings up the IR signal here. If I double click the IR signal here, it brings up this thing called IR setting, and it has a thing called repeat while button is pressed. This repeat while button is pressed means that if I hold down the up button, it'll just keep sending the signal over and over again. I'm going to disable that. And then notice that when I disable that, it changes this repeat function. It also highlights that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the repeats down a couple of steps and hit OK, and then retest everything. Okay. You can even test this by hitting this play function here. And again, if the remote is connected to the device, you don't even have to download the whole thing. You can just test it and test it several times. And so by doing that step where we changed the IR repeat here, What we did was, instead of sending it 3 times to that one on that one button press, sending it 3 times, we changed it down to 1. So sometimes what's happening is when it double clicks on the screen, but you only push once on the remote, it's actually sending the IR signal multiple times. So those are some of the things, and if that's the case, you'll end up having to do that literally on every one of these up and down, left, right, and enters. So you hit right, double click, take off the repeat button, bring this down to 1, hit OK. Okay, so that's how you test all that, and you just got to make sure that that functions the way you expect it to. It can even be the case with pause play. Usually that's not the case, but it can even affect that. And so those are a few things that for troubleshooting you might have to do. In general, that is the steps on how to program a remote. Hopefully that helps you guys out a lot. And again, file, save, works wonders.